pistol brace inventor Alex Bosco on a federal appeals court siding with him over the ATF. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of TheReload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America. You can, of course, also buy a membership if you want to dig a little bit deeper into that topic and stay as well informed as possible. We aim to deliver sober, serious reporting and analysis for you. We try to stay away from hot takes and opinion as much as possible, do our own thing, try to be a little bit different than everybody else on that front. But speaking of staying up to date with what's going on with guns in America, this week we are discussing the latest in the legal fight over President Biden's pistol brace ban. And to do that, we actually have Alex Bosco, who is the founder of SB Tactical and the inventor of said pistol brace. Welcome back to the show, Alex. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Can you tell people just a little bit more about yourself, a little more background for anyone who might not know?
Yeah. I think a lot of people know at this point. I've been on a few shows talking about this, but I invented the pistol brace back in 2012 and started the company SB Tactical, which kind of changed the way people buy guns on the market. And, a lot of people used to buy rifle ARs. Everybody kind of swung to these large format pistols because of the brace. And, it was a crazy way. I mean, a lot of people say it's very much like what happened to me was the American dream. Come up with an idea, market the idea, find somebody to help you sell it, and eventually, run into a brick wall with ATF. So I don't know if that's exactly part of the traditional. That might not be. Yeah, that might not be the traditional American dream, but it was certainly part of it. And a lot of that started back in, not to get right into ATF stuff, but we went from 2012 to 2015, 16 before we were starting to have some discussions with ATF. So it's been a crazy ride, and here we are. What is this now? 10, almost 12 years later. So we're still talking about them. We're still around. Hopefully we're going to be around in the next few years as well.
Well, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has given you perhaps a new lease on life, or additional one. We'll talk about some of the other cases that have already happened, but you were part of the group that sued the ATF over its rule that was implemented in 2023 that sort of effectively reclassified nearly every braced gun out there as a short barrel rifle under the National Firearms Act. Or I guess the ATF's estimate was something like 99% of them, but they couldn't really tell you which ones were impacted and which ones weren't, which was kind of a significant part of this ruling that we're going to talk about. But, and that, of course, just to give people a refresher, when something is classified as a short barrel rifle under the National Firearms Act of 1934, if you do not register that device, that firearm, with the ATF and pay a tax stamp, although they waived the tax stamp, which sort of undercuts the concept of the National Firearms Act as a tax law. But if you don't register and you don't comply with those regulations, you could face years and years in federal prison, as that is a federal felony. And so there's a pretty significant reclassification effort by the ATF to make what you produced effectively something that nobody would want to buy, right? I mean,
well, that's exactly why the implications of this Eighth Circuit win are so important. There's really a few things, to kind of go back to the case, what this Eighth Circuit case is about. Logical outgrowth is something that it's a legal term. I needed to learn a little bit about it too. But if we think about what the ATF originally did, is they came up with a rule. They proposed this rule under the Administrative Procedures Act, and we all got a chance to say what we thought about what this rule was going to be. And what did ATF do? They came up with a set of essentially points, a point system that would determine or help us determine objectively what is and what is not a brace. And because I think it was something like 90% or 95 or even 99% of the responses were negative, at the end of it, somebody at ATF said, listen, okay, scrap that thing that we just did. Just say that, 99% of these things are not going to be considered a brace. And essentially, the ATF is going to be the arbiter of understanding what is and what is not a brace. So logical outgrowth.
On a gun-by-gun basis, too, right? Basically, they would have to look at any gun before determining whether or not it was an unregistered, illegal SBR or just a regular old firearm.
Which is interesting because what they said was it's too difficult. There's so many braces on the market. It's too difficult for us to look at what's on the market and give you an understanding of what is and isn't a brace. So everybody in the United States will have to send us. That's easier than coming up with a set of numbers, specific numbers.
And you weren't actually allowed to send you couldn't just voluntarily send them your gun for classification. They don't do that. It was basically just, if you get in trouble, we'll figure it out then. And so it kind of, with a lot of these rules that the ATF has put down during the Biden administration, they kind of cast a cloud over the legality of all of these firearms, right? Just effectively.
Well, that's exactly what they were trying to do. So I think what the ATF essentially wanted to do was cast enough doubt. And look, we are as gun owners the most law-abiding of people, because why? We don't want to lose our rights to the guns that we love to shoot every day. So, as long as the ATF, which is the entity that regulates everything that we do, is telling you, no, well, we're not sure, you might go to jail because, as you said before, it's a prison sentence if you own a short-barreled rifle that's unregistered. What happens to the sales? You chill the sales. That's what ATF is trying to do. And that, to me, is what's fundamentally wrong about this. You should not have a politicized agency trying to kind of, spin things in a way to bring fear in the eyes of its citizens. That's not your job. Your job is really to kind of give us direction, which is what FRAC does with Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition. Yes, a mouthful. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, listen, ATF, you have blinders on. You need to do certain things for the agency, for the people, because the people need to understand that we can do something or we can't. We know in our industry that a firearm under 16 inches, with a barrel of under 16 inches intended to be fired from the shoulder, is a rifle. Why? Because they gave us the parameters. What's hard about giving us parameters for braces? Well, they didn't want to do that. And they've admitted to why they didn't want to do that, because they wanted to be able to get to somebody and put them in prison in some way, shape, or form. They don't want to be held to a standard. They want to be able to decide whether or not at the end. And that, to me, is fundamentally wrong, un-American. And what it shows is that the agency has become completely politicized. So getting back to the case itself, logical outgrowth is essentially what the judges told the ATF was that the rule that you came out with was so far different than what you proposed that under the Administrative Procedures Act, you cannot do what you've done. You would have to repropose another rule because it's too different. And that's one of the points that they lost on. The other point that they lost on, and now I'm talking about Fifth Circuit. So Fifth Circuit did this before Eighth Circuit. The other point that they lost on was arbitrary and capricious. Now, those two terms themselves kind of explain everything. And kudos to FPC, because they were the ones who did this in the Fifth Circuit. It was fantastic. Okay. Fantastic win. The only problem, if there was a problem, and it's not a problem, it's just a criticism, I guess, and it's not on FPC, it's on the judges, is that they really didn't enter into much detail on the arbitrary and capricious side. And that's where this win in the Eighth Circuit is so important, because what the judges did is they really kind of, they took the language that the ATF used and they threw it back in their face to explain why it was so arbitrary and capricious. And that's why this win, I don't want to compare the wins, because the Fifth Circuit win was such a great win. I don't want to take the wind out of its sails, but the Eighth Circuit is really what's going to solidify any future disruption in the courts or disruption in the industry with respect to the sale of braces. Because now the ATF has been told, listen, the terms that you've used here, they are considered arbitrary and capricious. So now in the future, if the ATF wants to come out with some other kind of ideas, they can no longer use the terminology they've used. They have to come up with something completely different because those terms have been deemed arbitrary and capricious.
Yeah, because obviously the ATF's position in all of this has been that there's a sort of loophole in the NFA because of the way that rifles are defined, not by their caliber or their mechanism or their design, basic design of the firearm itself, but whether they're intended to be shouldered, to be pressed against your shoulder, and they've argued that the pistol braces are sort of a way around this rule to keep people from having to register what the ATF argues are short barrel rifles. And so one of the reasons that they made their rule less than totally specific, I guess, to put it one way, or arbitrary and capricious, as the court ruled, was to try and prevent people like you, I guess, right, from finding new ways to circumvent what the ATF wants you to do. And the judges effectively said, you can't do that. It's not, sometimes people are just looking to try and comply with your regulations, which I think is your position here, right? Like if they had put down that point system that had a categorical, that wasn't, that was much more objective and not subjective in some of its terms, I imagine that would have been something you would have liked to see from them.
I've had this conversation so many times, and that is the point. Like what you're bringing up right now is the point. If they had come up with a system whereby the industry could surmise what is and what is not a brace, we wouldn't be in this scenario right now.
Right. And the judges criticized them specifically for that because the ATF's position seems to be basically, and you see this a lot in like social media moderation, where their argument is always, we can't give you specific rules because then people will circumvent those, the letter of the law kind of thing. And that seemed to be where the ATF was coming down on this rule as well, and many of the other rules that they've put out. We can't really give you the exact specifics because then people could make something that's compliant, but we don't like, I guess.
Right. But the response of the judges is there are criminal implications here. Mm-hmm. And people need to be able to understand what the regulations are. Okay. I mean, I need to know as a manufacturer of these products, can I make this or can I not make it? Okay. If I can't make it, tell me how I can make it. And that's part of the issue here is that I've sat down with ATF for years saying, okay, but this is when they started their shenanigans years ago. I was like, well, okay, what can I do then? Help me understand that. And I think people will remember that out of firearms technology branch, some of the text would say, well, there's a length of pull issue. We want the length of pull to be anywhere between 13.5 and 14. And all these numbers kind of came out. So I think initially they did want to come up with some kind of set standard, rules, like essentially like the GCA or the NFA where it describes stuff. But listen to what I just said, though, right now. What is the GCA? What is the NFA? These are acts of Congress. Okay. And this is why this is just such a blatant, overreach of an agency. They are not allowed to come up with those types of things because why? They're just an agency. Okay. It's Congress that needs to come up with these ideas. And that's essentially, I think, why they lost. Yes, arbitrary and capricious. Yes, the rule was too different from what it came out with. But fundamentally, people of the gun, when we see these types of agencies and this type of overreach, we say, well, hold on a second. You're some unnamed bureaucrat. How are you coming up with regulations that have criminal implications on U.S. citizens that aren't codified in law? The Gun Control Act is codified into law. We know that the definition of a rifle is a barrel of 16 inches intended to be fired from the shoulder. Why don't you have problems with a bullpup, which is shorter than some of my registered short-barreled rifles? It's probably because for them, not many people buy bullpups. Who knows? But the brace, millions and millions of braces were sold. Now, ATF came up with that BS 7 million number, or 9 million. I can guarantee you it is way more than that. So,
where would you put the number at?
Well, I think the 30 million number is a number that is far closer to what it's at. I think I forget, there was a group that came out. It was a Congressional Research Center came out with 30 to 70 million, I think, or 30. I think
they were 10. ATF was 3 to 7, and then Congressional Research Service was 10 to 40. So you would think somewhere. I would say closer to 30.
I would say closer to the 30 range.
Okay.
To the higher end of what CRS came out with. So yeah. So I mean, it's something that is in common use.
Yeah. Regardless of, honestly, even the 3 million number, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of Americans. This is by far the most significant of any of these rules the Biden administration has put in place, or the bump stock ban from the Trump administration before that. None of those really, I think, come close to affecting as many people as this one did. Just to put a dot on that last point about, the ATF's reasoning for why they wanted to make these, the rules so sort of vague and, or not put more specific criteria into their point system or what have you, is the Judge Graz, who wrote the majority opinion in this case. He said, he was responding to this idea from the ATF, and it said that the regulated parties wish to see more specific metrics does not mean they wish to skirt or circumvent the law, as ATF insinuates. They may simply wish to comply with the law by producing or equipping stabilizing braces that do not have a rear surface area that allows for shoulder firing a weapon, for instance. He's talking about one of the particular requirements. But is that basically how you feel on this?
That hits home to me, because I sat down with ATF with the highest levels of ATF on numerous occasions. I could probably count 5 different times where I had all of my attorneys in the same room, and we had been sitting there saying, tell us what you want us to do. Give us parameters under which we can work. Help us understand where you want to go with this. When you do that and you try to comply year after year with the same people, and these people come back to you with a smile on their face saying, oh yeah, don't worry, we're not coming after you. We're really just trying to figure things out. We want to work with you. And when you see that, and then when you see the final outcome, which is obviously DOJ coming after, basically coming after your product, you understand that there is a serious disconnect here. And the thing that bugs me the most, and why it hits so home, is that you have this politicized agency. Which is why if we'll end up talking about it, but it's okay, so where are we going with this? How do things change from here? And the answer is, I have, I whiteboard this to myself, or I'll even write it down on my mirror sometimes, but it's if this, then that, if this, then that. But if you have a politicized agency and you are a manufacturing company like mine, where we're trying to navigate the industry, it's really hard. It's really hard to make decisions. Do you buy this new tool for $150,000, thinking that maybe Kamala Harris is going to be the president and she's going to send the DOJ knocking on your door the next day? Do you do that? I've spent millions defending this product. People have been gracious enough to buy this product from us. I am so grateful for all of the people that have bought our product. We have some of the best customers in the industry. And I am thankful to them, because they have allowed me to fight this. The sales of this product is what allowed us to stay alive for a year without making any sales. Think about that. Think about all the people that and I'm a private company. I'm not, this is not some big company. This is just us. We have the people that we've hired. To me, it was really personal. I was Stephen, you have to understand, when you have the federal government coming down on top of your product after having spoken to them for years, It's such a difficult thing to deal with. The money aside, yes, it's millions of dollars to fight the federal government, but it's personal. It really was personal. That's why this win, FPC's win in the Fifth Circuit at first, and now this Eighth Circuit win. To me, this Eighth Circuit win is everything, obviously, because my company's name is on the lawsuit, amongst others. Right. So it's a huge win.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about what it's been like since the very beginning, 2012? You invented this product and then from there you've had even before the rule came out, the ATF has been going back and forth with you guys for years on this, right? Can you just talk a little bit about how you've tried to navigate that whole process?
Yeah, so obviously I have a team of attorneys that works for us. It really all started, I think, back in, was it 2015 was when the first letter came out that said, well, you could own it, but if you put it up to your shoulder, then it's going to change the classification simply by use.
Yeah, it's a redesign, right?
The redesign, that was the whole redesign thing. And I think everybody thought that was ridiculous. There were all these videos of people taking their spoon and cutting a cake and saying, "Oh, now my spoon is a knife." How does it work that way? And I think ATF even knew that it was a ridiculous stance
because they rescinded that eventually, right?
Well, yeah, they rescinded everything eventually, but they rescinded that right after, or was it right before Trump was elected? So I sat down with ATF and we all kind of agreed that this is ridiculous. Like you can't say something like this. And they came out with they rescinded that ruling and memory hold it because it was no longer on their website. It was gone. And they came up with this 2017 ruling that essentially said you could incidentally, sporadically, and occasionally fire from the shoulder without, running afoul of the NFA. And things went crazy from that.
Why do they justify this idea of like how the user actually interacts with the firearm being relevant? Because isn't the definition just supposed to be whether it's designed and intended to be shouldered? And isn't that on the manufacturer side?
It is on the manufacturer side, and in the Eighth Circuit case, the judges actually looked at that and they called out ATF because ATF essentially said that they were going to look at marketing material from third parties. So,
right.
There's a lot of people out there
too, right? That was part of the ATF standard.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Right. So,
which they also had an issue with.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cases that dispute that you can't look at that, but ATF went with it anyway. And they were called out by it. And the judges said, hey, if you're going to look at what other people how other people are going to alternately use it, shouldn't you also look at how the manufacturer actually designed it? And they didn't do that. They didn't look at what SB Tactical's marketing material was. They looked at what some guy on YouTube's material was. Right. Which, obviously a judge is going to see that and say, no, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. And,
also, so,
that was
just, and I don't think this comes into play in the case necessarily, but the main argument or criticism as to why braced guns should not be allowed is, and the ATF has said this directly. I think Merrick Garland has said it. They claim that it makes the guns more useful for mass shootings. Right? There was a mass shooting in Daytona, I believe, where the shooter had a braced gun. Do you even buy that basic argument to begin with?
You started saying, you didn't finish what they're, not to take away from what you said. They did say that, but they said that under the guise of the brace makes the firearm more accurate and therefore more deadly.
Right.
It's not that it gives them it's used more in mass shootings or it helps mass shootings. The reason that it helps mass shootings, according to them, is that it makes the firearm more accurate. Mm. That type of argument is hopelessly ridiculous, considering that the whole point of a firearm is to make it accurate. Everything on a firearm is meant to make it accurate. The the scope, everything on it, the barrel shroud so you don't burn your hand, the pistol grip, everything on the firearm is intended to make it more accurate. So
Sure.
the next step from there is, okay, well, fine. That's your argument. Well, then demonstrate to me how millions, let's just use the 3 million number that ATF says. Okay, so there's 3 million braces that are are in the field that people own. How many times were they used in some kind of mass shooting? And I think there's maybe 3. Is that what we said? There were 3 different mass shootings where there was, I
believe so.
Whatever. Let's say 10. Let's say it's 50. Okay. There's 3 million braces on the market. If you're going to tell me that this is something that is so dangerous that it needs to be banned, prove it to me. And they can't do that. That's something that they've never been able to do. It's just it's a talking point. And judges in court cases don't care much about talking points. So much so that this was not a talking point. So
I've also always the whole you would put a brace on a pistol, which would be a firearm with a barrel of less than 16 inches, and that's the advantage is perhaps in tighter spaces, or for people who are disabled. Obviously, the main intent of the brace to begin with. But let's say we're just trying to get a shorter barrel and have that on our AR platform gun. I don't know that I've seen a mass shooting where that would have been an advantage to any of the attackers. Not that they necessarily need advantages in those scenarios because they're just shooting at unarmed people in the streets generally. But it's just something that's stuck out to me before.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, I've heard a lot of anti-gun people say that collapsible stocks now are a problem because they make the firearm more concealable. And I think some of the comments about the brace was that, well, adding a brace to the firearm, it's more concealable. And they made that argument. I mean, think about that. Adding a brace to one of these guns makes the firearm more concealable? No. So it's a ridiculous statement. I've seen a lot of these videos coming out of inner cities where you see these guys with AR-15s. Do you think any of those guys have a brace on their gun? None.
Yeah, I mean, it may make the gun slightly more concealable, but not actually concealable. Right? I mean, just given the length of an AR platform firearm, even one with a barrel that's 10 inches or whatever, what have you, is still going to be a very long firearm. So that makes sense. But getting back to the legal side of this, back to the court situation. Now that so one of the other interesting things here is it was a 2-1 ruling in this 8th Circuit case, but the dissent wasn't actually on the merits of the argument put forth by you guys in the ATF. It was more dealing with what the 5th Circuit had already done in vacating the rule. Can you just explain that aspect of it a little bit for us?
So yeah, the dissenting judge, we were asking for a preliminary injunction. The dissenting judge really didn't get into any of the detail about whether it was arbitrary and capricious, because his understanding was that we had already had the vacator in the 5th Circuit. Therefore, there was no need for any kind of preliminary injunction. Do I disagree with the judge? I don't disagree with him, but I think that it was really important, as the other judges insisted, to get into the detail of all of this. So I understand his position, but certainly, yeah.
Yeah, it was given that that's the dissent here, not necessarily disagreement on the merits. I mean, he doesn't say one way or the other whether he agrees or disagrees, but what the majority ended up doing in this case is not issuing any sort of injunction or vacate or whatever, what have you. They sent it back down to the district court to determine what the right remedy could be, because their point, I guess, was that sure, the rule is currently vacated, but that might not solve all of the issues that you guys have as plaintiffs. It might not fix all of the harm that you've incurred, I guess. So what are we looking at as far as next steps in this case, and then overall with including that 5th Circuit case, that because vacating the rule basically means that the ATF can't enforce it at all anywhere, right? That was already the case.
Correct.
So what are we seeing now? What are the next steps here?
Well, it's going to go back to Judge Hoffman, who's the judge who denied us a preliminary injunction after a year almost. So we waited a long time for that. It was a difficult thing to wait for. And when we got the denial, it was fairly, in my opinion, and obviously I am a layman, Judge Holland knows much more than I do about the law, but it seemed very kind of flimsy. And no, we're not going to grant you an injunction because essentially you probably won't win this case. The judges said the opposite, and now it's gone back to Judge Hovland. And so I'm assuming at this point, they've directed him to, I think, essentially grant us the preliminary injunction. But with the vacator already in place, I think he might say, well, okay, I grant you the preliminary injunction, but because there's a vacator, there's really no need for the preliminary injunction. I'm not an attorney, so I'm really kind of looking at it from a layman's point of view. What I do know is that because of the detail in which this appeals court has responded, it makes it, the second part of your question was, where is this going in the future? It makes it very difficult for an ATF to simply turn around, redraft a rule, and start over again. Because they really have to start, if they're going to try and go after braces again, they're going to have to take a completely different angle and use completely different terminology. Right. So I don't understand exactly where they're going to go. I know, look, if you're the federal government and you have limitless money, why don't you just appeal everything? So everything will be appealed. I always look at it that way. They've appealed, DOJ's appealed in the Fifth Circuit. Right. This will probably be appealed, and we'll keep fighting it, and eventually, as we talked about offline, this may go to, the Supreme Court.
That's where I wanted to go next here. So, as you mentioned, they appealed the Fifth Circuit decision, DOJ did, and it seems likely that they'll probably end up, the Fifth Circuit has been pretty harsh on these ATF rules. You can look at the Vanderstock case and the Bumpstock case, where they ruled against both of those and throughout the Fifth Circuit. So it's probably going to happen with this case as well. And so the last stop for both of those other cases has been the Supreme Court. It seems entirely possible that this could also make it there. For whatever reason, the court seems highly interested in these cases. And in fact, the ruling in the Bumpstock case, Cargill v. Garland, impacted this Eighth Circuit decision where essentially they used the same analysis to determine whether or not the APA challenge is valid against the rule, because that was one of the arguments the ATF had, that this wasn't really something you could challenge. And the Eighth Circuit went along with, cited the Supreme Court's precedent in Garland Cargill v. Garland as reason to go ahead with this case. So, are you expecting that things will make it up there? And if so, that perhaps the court will side with you?
Yeah, that's a question that we get from folks who continue buying our product. They're, well, what's going to happen in a year or two? What's going to happen in 3 years? I mean, I don't have the crystal ball. What I can say is that we've got a runway now of, I would say, the next 4 to 5 years. I mean, I don't see. It all depends on what happens. So November, if we have a President Harris and we have a politicized ATF and DOJ, they are going to try and revamp whatever it is that they've been doing and try to come after braces. But we're talking about 2-3 years down the road. Mm-hmm. If we see a different direction where we have a President Trump and he's able to kind of shuffle people in DOJ who've been more openly political about going after certain types of products. If he's able to do that and kind of clean up the mess that's inside of these agencies, who knows? Maybe then it's the end of the line. Maybe they won't continue appealing and take this to the Supreme Court. This loss is they got a shellacking. And I think the judges, these appeals court judges, really kind of set a very difficult stage for DOJ to go back and fight this at a Supreme Court level. I just don't see this happening. This has been, we've been talking about the administrative state now for ever since even when Trump was around, we've been talking about the administrative state probably for the last 30 years. This is a overreach that I don't think most sane and let's say open-minded people from DOJ, whether they be of left-leaning or right-leaning nature, they would look at this and say, no, we don't want this in any agency. So I would imagine that at some point in time, this is going to end. I can't imagine they would take this all the way to the Supremes. But it could happen.
I mean, the other two have ended up there. We've already got two of these ATF rules up there, so I wouldn't be shocked. Although I wouldn't be surprised if the Vanderstock case, the homemade gun parts case, ends up shedding further light on the pistol brace ban case as well. It wouldn't be surprised. I mean, like I said, the Cargill already impacted your Eighth Circuit case here. I wouldn't be surprised if the next Supreme Court ruling on all this has a similar effect, but I guess we'll see.
I agree. I think what people need to look at, and I don't want this to be understated, is I've said this before, I am a private citizen. I own my own company, and DOJ is an entity that could go after anybody. So they have limitless funds, and essentially it's our funds because it's our tax paying. It's the money that we use for taxes. Mm-hmm. I think people need to understand what it means to have to fight the federal government. I mean, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars over years. And I think what's important to understand is that if you're going to be part of this industry, and I've said this before, find a group of people that you like. I don't care who it is. It could be FPC. It could be GOA. It could be NIGR. It could be whoever, NRA. It could, FRAC is the group that we work with. Find somebody and invest in that, whether it be $1, $5, or whatever you can afford. Those are the people that are going to end up helping us. So I can't state that enough.
And so where are things at with SP Tactical today? What does your business look like? Are you selling braces? What are your plans right now?
SBA 5, new brace came out. We've got several other braces that we're working on, several other products as well. So the direction is moving. It's moving the right way. We're kind of, obviously we're always a little bit concerned about the industry itself. I mean, everybody remembers what it was like after Trump won. There was a real big slump. Braces really helped that. We're hoping to kind of ride that again. But SB Tactical is really kind of, it's in its 12th year. We've got a lot of the same folks that are there. They've been through ups and downs, but I see a healthy future coming up in the next few years.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, look, we appreciate you joining the show, coming back to talk to us about this update on the legal situation with SB Tactical and pistol braces, and hopefully we can have you on again in the future when perhaps all this is finally over.
I hope so. Thanks again, Stephen.
All right. Well, we're going to head over to a member segment now, one of my favorite segments. So let's head over to that. All right. It's time for my favorite segment on the podcast, the member segment. We haven't done one in a few weeks, so I'm glad to be back with one of our Reload members, one of the people who actually makes this whole publication possible, makes the podcast possible. And this week we've got Thomas Schrader with us. Welcome to the show, Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us and for being a Reload member.
Pleasure to be on the show.
So where are you located, if you want to tell us what part of the country are you in?
I'm in Dallas, Texas. So
okay,
pretty much middle of Texas.
Nice. I like Dallas. I mentioned this, I think, before we began, but my favorite place there is Hard 8. Have you been to Pecan Lodge? That's like I don't know, but when I go into cities, I try to ask my Twitter followers or whatever where to go. Pecan Lodge is always a big one. I did enjoy that place. Do you have a favorite barbecue place?
Favorite barbecue place? Trying to think of it, because there's a place that we go to, or at least my parents go to in Allen. I can't remember it right now, but it's top of my head. But small local joint, run by dad and son, and it's really good. Really really good.
I feel like that also tends to be the kind of thing. Sort of, I'm from the Philly area originally, and it's like with cheesesteaks. You can kind of go. There's lots of places. Everybody actually kind of changes every couple of years. What's supposed to be the best cheesesteak place in Philly right now? Angelo's on South in the Italian market is supposed to be that's one everybody talks about. Not that long ago was D'Alessandro's and Tony Luke's, and it switches around. Jim's, I guess I'm wearing a Jim's steaks shirt right now, but at the same time, you could go any neighborhood and get a good cheesesteak in Philly. And so I feel like that's kind of how it is in Texas a little bit with barbecue.
Yeah, I guess like it's kind of like, there's a lot of like, I guess pick your favorite. So, I mean, there's a lot of joints, a lot
of mom and pop places.
Yeah. I mean,
makes sense.
Yeah.
But so what got you into firearms? You tell us or are you into firearms for one? Like, is that, generally our audience tends to be, right? This is a firearms policy and politics publication, but, are you into firearms? And if so, when did you start becoming interested in them?
I mean, I've always been interested in firearms ever since I was young. Partly because I come from a military family. My dad served in the Air Force for 20 plus years, retired as a lieutenant colonel. My grandfather, he was in the single corps in the Army back in the 40s, 50s. So I've always, and I would later join the Army back in 14, got out in 18. So I've always had an interest because of that. And then also just the media I consumed. I watched a lot of action movies, even though I probably shouldn't have as a young child. James Bond, Predator, The Matrix, the scene when when Neo and Trinity is about to rescue, they're doing that rescue mission. And they, before they go into the building, it's like they go into the gun room. It's like
the white room with all the guns.
Yeah. So it's like, man, it's such a cool scene. So, and then also a lot of the video games I played, like, Call of Duty, James Bond, but, GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. So, I've always been kind of always been fascinated with firearms. So.
Yeah. And that I feel like I have a similar background there in terms of the like media aspect of it. My grandfathers were both in the military, but my father wasn't. I didn't serve, but I was very intently engaged with guns through. I mean, video games are a big part of it, but certainly movies as well. Even though they're obviously not very good at accurately depicting how firearms work. Yeah. They do make them look, they do have a cool factor involved in both those areas. So you had a military background. Did you grow up shooting with your dad and grandfather as well? Was that part of it?
So like we weren't, even though like I was obsessed with firearms and even though I come from like a rather conservative family, we weren't really gun owners until we finally moved to Texas. And then even then, like, my dad, kind of slowly got into firearms, like early started to slowly get back into firearms, started with like lever action rifles. During the, when Obama got elected, he really got into like the panic, during that panic buy area. I remember that. And so he bought an AK. And so I remember, him taking us shooting. I mean, I had opportunities to shoot when I was in the Boy Scouts. So one of the first merit badges I was able to get was the, rifle shooting, which was, really fun. And then during high school, I was in JRTC, where I got to shoot competitive air rifle. And I mean, it was a fun experience. One of our coaches was a former Olympian. So it was just really cool, like getting advice from him. Yeah. And so it was pretty, So,
so they were there. Yeah. Guns were around during your formative years too. And then you enlisted yourself and served for 4 years. Yeah. And did that carry over? Like you said early on, there's plenty of people who are conservative, maybe even have a military background in their family or themselves who don't automatically become gun owners. Was when you got out, how did your attitudes towards guns shift or change, or did you decide to by yourself at that point, or how did things progress for you?
So like for me, it's like, when I was getting out, like I wanted to get into firearms. It's kind of hard to get into firearms in the military because, you can move around a lot. You might move to a base that may not be, or you might move into a state that may not be super friendly to firearms. And so I never really, it wasn't really until like, okay, it's starting to get out and it's like, okay, I'm going to move back to Texas. I started to, get into it. I decided to buy, an AR-15 because one, service connected is like, okay, this is the weapon that I'm most familiar with. So I might as well get that. And then two, also, I'm just like, at the time, you had the Parkland shooting. There's all this like talk about, oh, we need to ban the AR-15. So I'm like, I'm just going to buy one just because I want one. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. That's definitely, I think, the two driving factors that you see for the AR-15's popularity. I mean, it is obviously a very useful rifle. It's modular and it has a lot of, you could configure it to do all sorts of different things as a rifle from a practical standpoint. But there's also the how many people have served in the military and used that platform and they're used to it and they liked it, and then they get out and they go and get it. And then obviously it's been at the center of the political fight over guns, which has motivated a lot of people to, kind of like, you say I can't have this. Well, I'm going to, like, I can and I will. And I'm certainly going to take advantage while I have the opportunity at this moment. So it is interesting to see the way that all coalesces into the rifle's popularity. I mean, it's I think fairly controversial to say it's the most popular rifle in the country since the assault weapons ban expired back in 2004. And it's just fascinating to see those things come together and to hear you talk about it as well as sort of a direct example of those motivations, at play. Yeah. And so you got an AR-15. What other is that mainly what you shoot? Do you have other firearms? What do you do now that you're out of the military? You're living in Texas, obviously very gun-friendly state, a lot of ranges around Dallas. I've been to some nice ranges in Dallas, Fort Worth. Sure, there's probably more than a couple out there. So what do you primarily focus on these days?
I mean, I do a bit of collecting, and I also do a lot of competition shooting. I mean, I did like I said, like I did air rifle, competitive air rifle back in high school, and then as soon as I got out, or as soon as I got back, like I started to sort of tinkle or get my toes into like action shooting. COVID kind of happened, so it's kind of hard to do that. But right. As soon as that started to die down and I started to go, start doing more action matches, really got into the brutality matches that's run by InRange. Okay. I went to Woodland twice now, so had a lot of fun there. And so I've been just been doing a lot of competition shooting, and also just doing a lot of just collecting, I like older guns too. I think my third rifle I bought was a M1 Garand, so the CMP. Okay. So
CMP, yeah, civilian marksmanship program. Great way to get into some of those World War II era firearms, some of the originals, from back then. Really cool program that's available to the public that most people don't know about, right?
Yeah.
We just had the Olympics, right? And a lot of people were pretty fascinated by Olympic shooting, mostly the air gun stuff, which is cool and fun and interesting to watch, and especially the different techniques that they all use and the equipment that they have, or the lack of equipment. It was just what made the Turkish shooter so popular. Yeah. But bullseye shooting is not easy, whether it's air gun or otherwise. But I did wonder doing that. The Olympic shooting is cool and fun and interesting to watch and super challenging. I would love to see some action shooting in the Olympics, though. Some 3-gun, something like that in there would be really cool, because as like bullseye's all about precision, and that is fascinating to watch. How these shooters can, especially the size of the targets they're shooting at, with the size of, the 10 ring, I think the X ring on the 10 millimeter or 10 meter pistol is like almost the same size as the bullet that they're firing.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating sport, but it would be interesting to see some action shooting in there too, don't you think? Like get some movement involved.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see that too, and I think unfortunately that's just because of the politics of like the games, not necessarily because like maybe not because it's the guns are bad per se, but just like that's just the particular style of shooting they want to focus on. And I also imagine there's also like what standard what standard of rifle should you do? Like, okay, I've heard that as one reason, like for the contention.
It'd be harder for other countries to compete in 3-gun.
And then also just like, and also just like, I think also just how like, because different countries have different rules with, how marksmanship, it makes it harder to train specific disciplines. So
yeah. I mean, that's why the only real guns that you see them using in Olympic shooting are shotguns, because those are, while still very restrictive in most of the world, at least possible to go out and get a skeet shotgun and practice with the right, with certain licensing, usually in places like England or Asia. So, there are, I think, political limitations that hold back other kinds of shooting sports from international competitions like that. But so you, after the service you're interested in, now in, not just home defense or self defense, but also collecting and sport shooting. What made you interested in gun politics and policy and brought you to a place like the Reload?
I mean, I guess again, as a young kid, I always sort of had an interest in politics. I always overheard my dad listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio. So it's like, that kind of earwormed into me. And, even in high school, I did debate. So, I mean, it wasn't really that great, but, it's just, I enjoyed it. And I guess with gun politics, I guess what made me interested in the Reload, I mean, I think the first time I came across you was, I think your first interview with Ian McCullen. And so he, brought traction to, I guess, your show, to your magazine. And I was like, okay, I like, I like this dude. I like Steve. For me, it's just like, it's like, one thing, I guess, one of the things that kind of, I think that's with a lot of folk is the annoyance with current politics, especially in firearm politics, is this sort of we need to be inflammatory all the time. And
it's a lot of red meat, a lot of
reactionary action. And I think for the most part, we need a little more nuance. We need to ground. We need to be a bit more grounded. And so, because, if you're too hot headed, I mean, you might, you're probably going to make, make the wrong people mad, or, you might, or it's like, okay.
People. Yeah.
Or, how often we've seen people, say, oh, this is going to overinflate this bill. And it's turns out, no, it's not. And then you lose more credibility. You lose credibility because when they actually do pass, the actual legislation, they're not going to listen. So,
great point. And that's something I try to focus on here at the Reload is being as honest as possible, as credible as possible, whenever we're writing about what's going on with legislation. And I think we have an advantage in just level of information, where I live near DC in Northern Virginia. And I've been doing this work for, I feel old now, but 15 years. I'm not that old, but I've been doing it for quite a while, and it is my specialty. And that's was something that I always noticed with it's easy to look at mainstream media and point out that they often don't understand firearms and gun owners and the function of firearms, or even firearms laws. I think it's less talked about how gun media rarely understands the Hill, that really understands the lawmaking process. They're not good at the politics side of it. They're not as well versed in that stuff. And so that's where I thought we had an ability to fill that gap of both those things, being informed about guns and about gun politics, about how DC works and where this stuff goes. So I'm glad that is something that shines through at least to some degree.
Yeah, definitely totally agree with that. I mean, I think that sometimes I think with a lot of groups, you have a lot of people that kind of stick in their bubbles, and it's just like sometimes you just like, it's funny when we kind of talk about that, but then we kind of also stay insular in our own bubbles. And in order to, like, I guess if you want to change stuff, you have to get outside and actually like interact with people, even if they, disagree with you, even if like, okay, you don't, even if they fundamentally don't agree with your ideology, it's like, well, you have to kind of talk to them. You kind of have to interact with them, or it's like, okay, these people are your neighbors, man. So
sure. Absolutely. And that's what I try to bring that focus to the podcast too, having a variety of different voices, different points of view, which, and I don't always agree with all their points of view personally, but that's not what the show is about, right? It's not about trying to yell people's opinions back in their face again, which is what you see in a lot of media across all sorts of ideologies. So we try to do things a little bit differently. And I'm glad that cuts through some of the noise out there. But and look, I'm glad that you're able to come on and talk to us a little bit and share some of your story and give us a little more insight into the community that makes the Reload possible. Because again, this is how we fund ourselves. This is where our revenue comes from. It's from members. I think that is, I do want to grow the publication. I want it to be a bigger operation. I want us to be able to do more in the future. And I'm sure we'll have other revenue streams as that happens. But I think this will always be our core, because this provides the least amount of conflict of interest. We are funded by guys like you and our other members who are interested in what you just laid out there. And that aligns very closely to what our editorial goals are, right? To present facts as soberly as possible, to take this issue seriously from a hard news perspective, and giving our analysis of what's going on, not our hottest opinions on how things should be, but looking at them as they are and trying to give people a better understanding of how this stuff works. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us and just giving us a bit of your time and explaining a little bit more about yourself.
My pleasure, man.
Awesome. Well, that's all we've got for this week. If you want to be a Reload member, you can, of course, head over to thereload.com and buy a membership today. You'll get exclusive access to hundreds of pieces of analysis and reporting you won't find anywhere else. And you'll have the opportunity to get on the show just like this. And you'll get the show day early. All of our interview podcasts, members have access to the day before they go public. So head on over and check it out. That's all we've got for you. Thanks, guys.